Chapter 20, Summer, 1972. Dear Remus, how's your summer so far? Mine is rubbish. Last week was Bellatrix's wedding. At least she won't be at Hogwarts next year. Regulus and I were groomsmen, and I had to wear green robes. Definitely not my colour. My whole family was there. It was awful. You should have seen what Bella did to her hair. She looked completely mental. Sissy has dyed hers too, blonde, so she looks like her stuck-up boyfriend Malfoy. I can't believe my aunt let her. I bet my mum wouldn't let me dye my hair. I wish we could do magic out of school. I've been researching curses in Dad's library. Should have some excellent stuff for Snivelus next year. James says his parents are letting me stay with them this summer. My parents won't let me go to the Potters, but they might let me stay with the Pettigrews, so I'm getting Pete to invite me. James said he'd invite you too. I hope you can come. It'll be great, just like school. See you soon. Sirius O. Black. Dear Remus, I hope you're having a good summer and the muggles aren't getting you down. Mum and Dad say you're more than welcome to come for a visit. Sirius is trying to wrangle the whole summer, which would be brilliant. If you can come, reply to this owl ASAP. Mum says she'll write a letter herself if Matron needs her to. Best, James. Dear Remus, James and Sirius say they've tried to get in touch with you, but you haven't replied. I told them maybe you didn't know how owls worked. You just tie the letter to their foot, like we've done, then let it go. They usually end up where they're supposed to. Hope you can come visit. Peter. Dear Remus, are you all right? We haven't heard anything from you. I hope you haven't tried to use the Muggle post. I'm at the Potters now. It's great. His parents are really nice. Nothing like mine. James is a bit of a pain. He thinks we're both getting on the Quidditch team this year and keeps getting me up at 6 to practice flying. Completely bonkers. It's sort of fun though, and if Gryffindor needs a beater, then I might try for it. I can't wait to show you my broom. You can have a go on it if you want. You might like flying better if you have decent equipment. James reckons your matron won't let you come. Do you think if we wrote to Dumbledore and McGonagall, they could get permission? You're a wizard, after all. You shouldn't get stuck with muggles all summer. If you really can't come, are you going to Diagon Alley for your school things? Maybe we could meet there in August. Hope you're okay. Sirius O. Black. Dear Remus, it's not the Marauders without you. Please come. We've got loads of room, and Mum doesn't mind. I've been training Sirius and Pete for Quidditch next year. I reckon that if we get you over your problem with heights, then you might make a decent beater. You like hitting things, don't you? And you're probably the strongest of the 4 of us, so I reckon it makes sense. Sirius wants to be a beater too. He can show you how to do it. I'll even see if we've got my old broom still lying around in the shed, and you can have it. James. Dear Remus, please come and save us from James's reign of terror. I don't even want to be on the Quidditch team. Peter. Dear Remus, I hope you're getting these letters. We're starting to get worried about you. We all went to Diagon Alley together. It was great. James and Mum bought us ice creams and let us go wherever we liked. Probably spent about 3 hours in quality Quidditch supplies. I really wanted to get out into Muggle London and find a record shop, but we weren't allowed to leave the alley. Andromeda sent me this new album. Merlin, you really have to hear it, Lupin. It's better than Electric Warrior, better than anything. I'm sure the singer is actually a wizard. Have you heard of David Bowie? Are you having a good summer? What's it like being back? Write soon. Sirius O. Black. Dear Sirius, please don't send me any more letters. I can't read them, and Matron gets annoyed by the owls. See you on the train. Remus. Chapter 21, 2nd year, Regulus Black. Remus gripped the handles of his battered old suitcase with white knuckles, his stomach turning excited somersaults as he watched the bustling crowds. Matron had let him run at the barrier this time. though she looked away at the last minute, terrified. Now she was far behind him, on the Muggle side of the station, and he didn't have to see her again for 10 months. He'd had a terrible nightmare the night before that they would arrive at King's Cross and be unable to get through platform 9 3/4. None of it had been real. Magic, wands, wizards, his friends. But Remus tried to push these thoughts from his mind as he gazed eagerly about himself, looking for a familiar face. "Let you come back, did they?" A cold voice interrupted his search. "Standards must really be dropping." Remus felt his shoulders tense. Why did the first person he spoke to have to be Snape? "Get lost, Snivelus," he spat. He squared up, turning to face the Slytherin boy with his meanest look. "Ugh, what on earth is that smell?" Snape drawled, wrinkling his overlarge nose. Remus coloured. He stank of antiseptic. He knew it. Matron had been much too liberal that morning. "I said get lost," Remus murmured, clenching his teeth and balling up his fists. He saw Severus recoil slightly. Remus knew how he looked. He'd had 2 months without magic, surrounded by bigger and tougher boys than Snape. He was wound as tight as a bear trap and ready to throw a punch by the smallest provocation. "Oi, Baldy!" Another voice sounded over the crowd. A boy with glasses and jet-black hair, sticking up at all angles, was leaning out of one of the carriage windows, waving madly at Remus. Remus smiled, forgetting that he was trying to frighten Severus, and waved back. He rubbed his head self-consciously. His hair had grown out while he was at Hogwarts, but Matron had shaved it all off as soon as he was back at St. Edmund's, making him look like a thug again. Casting a filthy look at Snape, Remus clutched his suitcase and hurried onto the train, pushing past other students to reach the carriage where his friends were waiting. "Lupin!" Peter jumped up, excited. He didn't quite know what to do with himself once he was on his feet. They certainly weren't going to hug like girls, and apparently handshakes weren't in order. Pettigrew awkwardly patted him on the arm instead, and Remus gripped his in return. "Hiya, lads." Remus smiled, his cheeks aching with happiness as he sat down. "How's it been?" "We should be asking you," James laughed, punching him in the arm. "Not one owl all summer." Remus glanced at Sirius furtively. He hadn't mentioned the letter Remus had sent him then. "You know, I'm practically a muggle over the holidays," he replied. "Couldn't even get into my trunk to do homework. They locked it up." That wasn't strictly true. Remus had asked Matron to lock his school things away, terrified the other boys would get to them. The homework he hadn't done because he hadn't been able to. There was a quiet noise of disgust from the corner. Remus looked up, frowning. Sitting on the seat beside Sirius was another younger boy with the same deep blue eyes and long dark hair, the same unmistakable black features, full lips and cheekbones that could cut glass. "This is Reg," Sirius nodded offhandedly. "Say hello, Reggie." "It's Regulus," the boy replied, irritably, his high aristocratic voice indignant. "My darling brother." Sirius raised his eyebrows at the other three. "Hi, Regulus," James smiled, offering a friendly hand. "I'm James." "Potter." Regulus looked down at his hand as if it was filthy. Sirius slapped him round the head. "Stop being such a little prick," he snapped. "These are my friends." "Well, I didn't want to sit here," Regulus replied. "You made me." "Oh, go on then, piss off then. Dunno why I bothered." Regulus stood up, stony-faced, then exited the car, slamming the door behind him. "Wow, he really has that black family charm," James grinned. Sirius shook his head, despairingly, propping a foot up on the bench opposite and leaning an elbow against the window pane. The whistle blew and the train began to pull out of the station. "Shouldn't have expected anything else," Sirius muttered. "He's totally brainwashed and annoyed with me. I shouldn't have been gone all summer." "Reckon he'll be in Slytherin then?" James sympathised. "Probably," Sirius glowered. He knows I won't talk to him if he is. Rather he was in Hufflepuff. Remus thought this was a bit harsh. Certainly, he disliked Snape and Mulciber, and yes, they'd played some pranks on the Slytherin house. But Remus had never hated Slytherins like Sirius seemed to. Surely he wouldn't disown his own brother just because they had a slightly different uniform? The only thing Remus could see wrong with the Slytherins was that most of them were snobs. And Sirius, James and Peter were snobs too, though they didn't realise it. This train of thought left him as they began to gather speed out of London, and Remus could finally relax into the idea that he was indeed returning to Hogwarts, and that magic was now officially permitted. He yanked open his suitcase and grasped his wand for the first time in months. Remus hadn't dared touch anything magical since the end of term, but now he pulled out one of his second-hand books. They'd arrived the week before from Dumbledore, opened it, and quickly performed the spell. He pretended he was scratching behind his ear with the wand, and muttered the words under his breath. Sirius must have seen what he was doing, because he had jumped down to pull his broom down from the luggage rack, distracting James and Peter. Remus looked down at the book, his heart racing. The words filled his mind like music, and he could finally read again. The summer had been incredibly dull. He'd attempted to read some of the books lying around at St. Edmund's, but without magic it was too frustrating. He'd very slowly gotten through each of the letters from his friends, but was much too embarrassed to attempt writing back to anyone but Sirius. He'd also had to lie low a lot. Remus felt as though he had passed whole days sometimes without speaking to anyone. The other boys had been told that he'd been away at private boarding school, paid for by his father's will. This, of course, made him more of a target than ever, and combined with his increasingly difficult full moons, Remus had spent much of the summer covered in bruises. Full moons were another reason he was relieved to be returning to Hogwarts, where Madame Pomfrey, the school's Mediwitch, was not only more sympathetic than matron, but better qualified to handle the particularities of his condition. Matron had been horrified to see the new injuries Remus inflicted on himself each month, and treated him as though he had done it deliberately, just to annoy her. It had been much worse than the summer before, when he had got away with a few scratches and bruises each night. Now, underneath his muggle clothes, Remus was almost covered in bandages and plasters which pulled and chaffed whenever he moved. He hoped he would be able to slip off to the hospital wing soon after they arrived. Sirius and James were busy telling Remus about their own summer, with Peter joining in here and there, keen to make it clear that most of the time it had been the three of them. It sounded as though they had all had a spectacular time, even if there was a lot of Quidditch. James's parents had a cottage by the seaside, as well as what James called their usual home, near London. The three boys had camped out on the beach, fished, flown kites, and plotted their pranks for the year ahead. They chatted excitedly for so long that Remus felt like telling them all to shut up. He felt a bit better when the trolley came around. James and Sirius pooled their pocket money and brought enough to feed half of the Gryffindor house. Remus had no complaints. As usual, he was very hungry. Remus was immensely glad that he had stuffed his face on the train, because he had forgotten how long the drawn-out ceremony was, especially when you weren't taking part in it. Regulus was indeed sorted into Slytherin, which came as a surprise only to Sirius, who Remus heard exhale sharply in disbelief. The younger black brother scurried over to join his peers and Narcissa, who was now sporting a silver prefect's badge, as well as a new sleek platinum hairdo. Severus patted Regulus on the back, sneering over at the Gryffindor table. "What's his problem?" Peter sighed as the food finally appeared. "You'd think he'd get over a few stupid pranks." "More like he needs to get over Evans," James said, sounding uncharacteristically pensive. They all looked at him in confusion. "Oh, come on, it's obvious," he grinned. "Old Snivelus is clearly madly in love with a certain carrot-topped Gryffindor." He winked at Lily, who gave him a disgusted look and then obviously turned her back on him to continue her conversation with Marlene. "So because we got the bird he fancies, he's going to be a pain in the ass for the next 6 years, Sirius replied, disbelieving. Remus blinked at him. Bird? Sirius was not the sort of boy who called girls birds. He was far too upper class. Where on earth has he heard that? Exactly, James confirmed, looking very proud of himself. Nah, Sirius shook his head. No one would care that much about a girl. Remus silently agreed with him. Still, Potter didn't seem to mind having his theories disputed. He shrugged, digging into his roast potatoes. If you say so. Must still be annoyed about that time Remus punched him then. Sirius laughed at the memory of that, finally cheering up. Chapter 22, Second Year. The Rise and Fall of Ziggy Stardust and the Spiders from Mars. Madame Pomfrey was horrified by the state of Remus's skinny, battered frame when he finally went to see her. "What has that woman been doing to you?" she gasped angrily. "Oh no, I did this all to myself." Remus gestured dryly at the bare chest. The nurse tutted, peeling away another bandage. "Yes, but she's barely done anything to treat you. I had no idea Muggle medicine was so primitive. These are magical wounds. They need magical care." Remus nodded, tiredly. He'd grown used to the carnage now. The pain had settled on his shoulders like a heavy burden, one he thought he would probably just have to bear. Life was full of limitations. He simply had more than others. Perhaps that was why he was so drawn to James and Sirius. Madame Pomfrey wanted to observe him overnight, but he refused grumpily. The full moon was 2 weeks away, and he wanted to sleep in his own bed as much as possible. He walked back to the common room, slowly. Though he was feeling better than he had in a month, Madame Pomfrey had given him a potion that made him feel loose and comfortable and pleasantly light-headed. There was no chance of a quiet afternoon, though, for when Remus reached the dormitory, he found Sirius sitting on his bed, the record player and brand new albums spread out around him. "Lupin!" he beamed excitedly. "You have to hear this." "Thank Merlin you're here," James groaned from his own bed, where he was flipping through a Quidditch magazine. "He's been banging on about that Muggle singer all summer." "He's not a Muggle," Sirius snapped, hand on his hips. "He has to be a wizard. Has to be. You should see the clothes he wears." Remus crossed the room and picked up the record sleeve. He smiled, mildly surprised. "Oh, Bowie. Yeah, I like him. I don't think he's a wizard, though." Sirius looked mildly disappointed that Remus had heard of him, and Remus hurriedly explained. "I've heard Starman a lot on the radio, but no one at St. Eddie's has the album." Placated, Sirius settled the black disc he was holding onto the turntable and fixed the needle in place. James sighed deeply and got up, leaving the room, magazine under his arm. Sirius ignored him, watching Remus's face eagerly as the slow drum beat began. Remus sat down on the edge of the bed and closed his eyes to listen. It wasn't the same as Electric Warrior. It was darker, moodier. Remus liked it a lot. There was a story in it, though he wasn't sure he understood all the parts yet. As the closing bars of Rock and Roll Suicide reverberated, Sirius lifted the needle and moved it back. "Listen to Suffragette City again. That's my favourite." Remus smiled. He could have guessed that. It was loud and rude, and you could dance to it. For himself, he thought he liked Moon Age Daydream best, because it was weird and spacey. Or Lady Stardust, because for some reason it reminded him of Sirius. His long black hair, his animal grace, the boy in the bright blue jeans. Remus quickly dismissed that thought, sure that Sirius would find it hysterically funny. Once they'd played the album all the way through again, they replayed their favourites. It was almost dinner time. They sat cross-legged together on the bed, poring over the album notes. "Maybe he is a wizard," Remus conceded dreamily. "He's not like a normal Muggle." "Told you," Sirius smirked triumphantly. "I'm going to get more too. All of his albums." "T-Rex had a new one," Remus said. Slider. Cool. I wish Mrs. Potter had let us leave the Diagon Alley. I even got some muggle money from Gringotts. What is Diagon Alley? Remus asked, though he thought he had some idea from the summer letters. Sirius's eyes widened, as they always did when Remus demonstrated his shocking lack of wizarding knowledge. Bloody hell, Lupin, he tutted. It's a wizarding street, in London. Muggles can't get in. Like Hogsmeade. Oh, right. It didn't sound that exciting to Remus. Shopping was boring. Where'd you get all your stuff? What stuff? School stuff. Your books, your robes. Sirius's eyes darted to the fraying cuffs of Remus's black school robes. His own were brand new, immaculately finished, and cut slightly better than everyone else's. Second-hand, I think, Remus replied. Dumbledore sends them. Dunno how'd get to a wizard street. I'm not allowed in London alone. Next summer, Sirius said firmly. You have to come to James's place and stay. We can take you to Diagon Alley. You'll love it. You know I can't, Remus said quietly, not making eye contact. We'll sort it, Sirius said with confidence. Talk to Dumbledore, McGonagall, the Minister for Magic, if we have to. Remus forced a smile, pretending that he believed Sirius. Yeah, thanks. Great. The rise and fall of Ziggy Stardust and the spiders from Mars became the soundtrack to the Gryffindor boys' dormitory for the next week, until even James, who was tone deaf, found himself humming along. Remus had never felt so satisfied and at ease in his entire life. He was away from St. Edmund's, away from grey shirts and matron and locked rooms and troubled boys who wanted to get at him. He wasn't covered in bandages, at least for the moment, and until lessons began on Monday, he had all the time he wanted to read, listen to music, and muck about with the marauders. He spent most of his time catching up on his reading and completing the summer homework they'd been set. Like a starving man, he devoured every piece of information presented to him, and even went to get more books from the library to investigate further. He also had to have a number of conversations with James before he could convince him that he had no desire to be on the Gryffindor Quidditch team. Remus was content to sit on the stalls with his book, occasionally glancing up to watch the other three boys flitting back and forth on their brooms. They were all very good, but it was obvious even to Remus that James was the best of all three. He didn't even look like he needed the broom. The black-haired boy soared up like a kestrel, his turns smooth, his dives nauseatingly sharp. Remus hadn't attended many Quidditch matches in his first year, but he felt sure that James would earn his place on the team. Sirius was much showier in his flying technique. He didn't lack James's skill so much as his discipline. Black appeared to get bored easily. He could go quite fast when he wanted to, but was more interested in looping and swerving dangerously than catching quaffles or repelling bludgers. He needed James to shout at him every few minutes to keep focused on the game. Peter was very competent after a summer of drills, but he was quite slow over long distances. James decided he might be better off as a keeper. You're acting as if you get to handpick the whole team, Sirius huffed as they headed back to the castle after one practice. They ought to let me, James shrugged, as if it was obvious. I'm better than at least half of the current team, and you're better than both beaters. And I know tactics. Just try not to be too shocked when they don't make you captain. Sirius rolled his eyes. You're still a second year. There weren't any second years on the team at all last year. Have some faith, Black, James winked, throwing his arm over his friend's shoulder. They strode ahead together, brooms in hand. The sun was setting behind them, and threw everything into sharp relief, outlining the two dark-haired boys in heroic gold. Remus watched them, lagging behind, and weighed down by all his books, thinking that they would probably be all a little bit surprised if James didn't get exactly what he wanted. Chapter 23, Second Year, Brotherhood. Remus did not have a brother, at least not one that he knew anything about. He supposed that his mother might have remarried and produced a few nice, non-magic, non-monster children. That didn't really feel like his business. He'd accepted his lot in life a long time ago. James, too, was an only child, and this went at least some way to explaining why he was so cocksure and demanding. Sirius talked about Potter's parents as though they were perfect saints, but they had clearly spoilt their son rotten. Peter had a sister who was a good deal older than him and had already left Hogwarts. She'd been in Hufflepuff, but Peter didn't talk about her very much. She was studying at a Muggle university, which apparently was the height of bad taste. So perhaps none of them really understood what was happening between the two Black brothers, which might have been why they didn't take it very seriously. It began the morning after the sorting. During breakfast, Regulus had received a gift from his parents, a brand new eagle owl. This was his reward for getting into the right house, which they found out because Severus gleefully read the letter aloud within earshot of the Gryffindor table. Sirius stared at his porridge, not rising to the bait, but Remus looked over at Regulus and saw that he was blushing hard, trying to snatch the letter away from Snape. "Didn't your parents confiscate your owl again?" Peter asked bluntly. Sirius gave a sharp nod. "Said I can have it back when I remember my duty to the family and start acting like a true Black. I don't care. I don't need an owl." "What exactly is your family duty, again?" James mused loudly, so the cackling Slytherins could hear them. "Go round with creeps like Snivelus and Mulciber. Marry your cousin." Sirius finally looked at James, his expression half grateful, half mischievous. "Oh yeah," he replied conversationally, just as loud as James. Snape, Regulus, and most of the other Slytherins who had been laughing were now quiet, narrowing their eyes at the two Gryffindor boys. Peter edged away slightly. "Inbreeding and creeping are the key aspects of my noble heritage. And picking on kids smaller than me, of course, cheating, lying, and cursing my way into power." "Well, mate, I'm sorry to break it to you," James replied, "but it doesn't sound like you're a Black at all." "Goodness!" Sirius's hands flew to his face in mock surprise. "What on earth am I?" "It's obvious," James shrugged. "You're a marauder." Sirius laughed, as did most of the Gryffindors sitting nearby. Remus saw Severus's hand reach for his wand, and quickly grabbed his own in preparation, running through a list of spells in his head, trying to come up with one that could stop him the quickest. But Regulus nudged Snape under the elbow, muttering, "It's fine." Remus was sure he was the only Gryffindor who heard it. "Come on," Snape sneered. "We'd better get away from all of this filth if we want to keep our breakfast down." This only made Sirius and James laugh harder, and Snape swept from the room, followed by Mulciber and a new first year called Barty Crouch. Regulus held back, glancing nervously between his new friends and his brother. The new owl sat perched on his crooked elbow, surveying the scene with an imperious, condescending look. He edged towards Sirius. You can borrow it, if you want," Regulus said quietly. "I never asked her to send me anything, but you know what she's like." "Yeah," snorted Sirius. "I know." They both looked at each other for a while, and Remus couldn't tell if they were staring each other down or trying to find the words to say something very difficult. "Look, I'm sorry, okay. You knew I'd end up in Slytherin," Regulus started, but was quickly interrupted by Sirius getting quickly to his feet. "I don't want your owl," he said stiffly, looking right through his brother. "If I need to send a letter, I'll borrow James's." With that, he pushed past Regulus and made to leave. James, Remus and Peter hurriedly got up and followed him. Remus glanced back at Regulus, who looked very pale and cold. Remus didn't think about Regulus very much after that. The line in the sand had been drawn, and it was their duty as marauders to support Sirius. Besides, they were all much too busy once lessons began. Remus threw himself into his studies this time, in a complete reversal of his behaviour the previous September. He read along eagerly, answered questions in class, and completed his homework as soon as it was set. In everything except potions, he was a model student. He hadn't forgotten what he'd read the year before about people with his problem. They did not do well once they left school. Those stupid enough to sign the register were excluded from almost any skilled wizarding work. He would have to be the best of the best, and even that might not be enough. But he had 6 more years to try. There was another element to his academic aspirations. Sirius. Well, Sirius and James really, but most importantly, Sirius. Remus didn't doubt that Sirius was his friend, exactly, but he did doubt that Sirius truly saw him as an equal. He railed against the Black family's beliefs in blood purity, but at the same time often made snide remarks about Peter's squib heritage. This was always behind Peter's back, and Remus dreaded to think about what Sirius was saying about him. Remus had learnt during his first term at Hogwarts that being a half-blood meant that he was slightly less trusted by other wizards. The Slytherins, in particular, targeted students with any kind of Muggle heritage. Marlene McKinnon, whose father was a Muggle, had perfected the Bat Bogey hex before anyone else in their year group and used it as means of defence. Lily Evans was protected from torment whenever Snape was nearby, but it was clear that plenty of the students thought that she was rather full of herself, considering the circumstances of her birth. Sirius never voiced anything quite so strong, but Remus had a feeling that him being better than everyone else at school was taken as proof that his magic was somehow better. Remus had an extremely strong desire to prove him wrong. It came as a mild surprise. He'd never been very competitive before. But then, he'd never been given the tools to compete. Of course, there would always be one insurmountable obstacle for Remus, and in September of 1972, it came towards the end of the month. Remus had been dreading it as always, and in the days beforehand remembered to mention that he wasn't feeling well in order to prepare his roommates for his impending absence. Truthfully, he had never felt better. Though the transformations had worsened, and the days required to recover had lengthened, Remus also found that as the moon began waxing and gathering strength, so did he. He was ravenously hungry, his senses sharper, his magic grew thick and heavy on his tongue like syrup, and he barely slept at all, instead staying up half the night reading vicariously, trying to ignore Sirius and James's furtive whispering in the next bed. He arrived at the hospital wing promptly, and Madame Pomfrey and McGonagall once more escorted him down to the Whomping Willow. They were very quiet as they made their way across the grounds, but once Remus was locked into the shack for the night, he heard the 2 women stop and began talking as they travelled back down along the passageway. They mustn't have realised he could hear them, that his hearing was better than most people's, especially on a full moon night. Madame Pomfrey was complaining about Remus's treatment plan over the summer. "Covered in injuries! I cannot, in all good consciousness, allow him to return there, Minerva. It goes against everything I know as a healer." "I understand, Poppy," McGonagall responded sharply as they crossed the grounds. "It is a difficult matter. When Remus's mother handed him over to Muggle authorities, she made things very hard. We have to tread carefully, very carefully. I shall speak to Dumbledore." "He's such a quiet little thing, never complains, even when he must be in such a lot of pain." Remus didn't hear any more. They had travelled too far down the passage, and his own screams drowned them out. In the morning, Remus came back into his body gasping as if he'd just been born. There was not an inch of him that didn't hurt. His head throbbed sickly, needles pressed behind his eyes. His neck and shoulders felt like they snapped. It hurt to breathe. Every heave of his chest caused pain to shoot through him, and he was sweating heavily. even in the cold air. There was a deep gash across his belly that made him want to be sick. He had lost a lot of blood already, and it was still bubbling up, thick wine red. He half crawled, half dragged himself across the room to a box of emergency medical supplies kept under the floorboards. He pulled out some gauze, using all of his remaining energy, and pressed as hard as he could against the dark wound. He cried out from the pain, but kept pressing. His breathing grew shallow, though even that hurt. He felt dizzy, wanted to curl up and sleep. "Stay awake," he urged himself, furiously. "Stay awake or you'll die, idiot." "Die then," a tiny voice appeared in the back of his head, out of nowhere. "It would certainly make things easier. For you, for everyone." Remus shook his head, dazed. He pressed harder, grunting with effort. In his misery, he wondered if the voice was right. Was he clinging onto a life that had never really wanted him? That might never be worth living? What if he did die? What if he just closed his eyes? It might just be a matter of sooner rather than later. He closed his eyes, exhaling softly. "Remus?" Madame Pomfrey's polite knock arrived on time as usual. He ignored it. He was too tired now. He rested his head on the dark floorboards and let go of the gauze. So tired. "Remus!" The door burst open and suddenly she was there, kneeling beside him, pulling his head into her lap. "Go away," he murmured, not opening his eyes. "Let me go." "Not on your Nelly, young man," Madame Pomfrey said, so fiercely that despite his confused state, Remus laughed. Then he winced, instinctively clutching his chest. The Mediwitch aimed her wand at his open wound and stitched it together in a matter of seconds. Then she felt his chest, where he'd touched it. "Broken rib," she muttered. "Poor lamb." She flicked her wand once more, and Remus felt an odd pop in his torso. Suddenly, it didn't hurt to breathe any more. He opened his eyes and looked up at her. She was busy tugging a blanket over his shoulders to keep him warm. "Now then," she whispered gently, though they were quite alone. "What do you think you're doing, giving me a scare like that, Her voice was so warm, her fingers so tender. Very carefully she pulled him into a hug. "We can't lose you, Remus. Not while I'm still at Hogwarts." "Hurts," Remus whispered. She held him tighter, and that did it. For the first time in a very long time, Remus began to cry. Not just a few sniffles either. As the sweet, kind nurse held him, he wrapped his own arms around her soft body and bawled like a baby. He had spent 2 full days in the hospital wing. The wound on his stomach was not the only one he had inflicted that night, though it was the worst. Madame Pomfrey's spells had been enough to stop the bleeding, long enough to get him out of the shack, but he needed rest and quiet. She gave him sleeping draughts regularly, and he drank them down without complaint, preferring not to be awake. The marauders came by, trying to see him, but at Remus's request, Madame Pomfrey turned them away. It was late on Friday morning when she finally let him go. "I'll send a note to your professors, let them know not to expect you. You're to go straight to your dormitory and lie down, understood?" He walked slowly, taking a different route than usual, thinking about the map. He ought to start working on that again. He'd read something very exciting about something called a homunculus charm. Once he reached the dorm, Remus crawled into his bed, drew the curtains around it, and lay on his back. Beams of light slit through the joints of fabric, headlighting a galaxy of dust. It was still warm for September, and someone had left the windows thrown open, filling the room with cool air. The breeze sucked the drapes on Remus's bed in, then pushed them billowing out. He watched it dreamily for a while, in and out. It was like being inside a lung. "Lupin!" a sharp voice shattered his calm. Sirius ripped back the curtains, flooding the small space with light, searing Remus's retina. "Ugh, what?" he groaned, shielding his eyes. "Sorry," Remus rubbed his arm nervously. "What is it?" "Remus, I have to tell you something." They were quiet for a few long moments. Remus slouched back, too tired to sit up. He sighed. Well? It's James, Sirius said desperately. He wants to talk to you. What? It's... Blimey, this is hard to say, Lupin. What are you on about? He knows. James knows, and he wants us to confront you about it. Remus sat up abruptly, his stomach flipping over. He what? Knows what? About your, where you go every full moon. Remus stared at Sirius. He didn't know what to do. You knew? I knew, Sirius confirmed. How long? Since last Christmas. I didn't want to say anything. Didn't want to make it harder for you. Remus was speechless. Sirius shook his head, impatient. But James worked it out too, the lanky idiot, and now he's decided we all need to confront you about it. I'm really sorry. I tried to get him off it, but you know how pig-headed he is. Yeah, Remus croaked, leaning forward rather suddenly. He held his head in his hands. This was it. He was about to lose everything that meant anything to him. It's okay. I think it's going to be okay, Sirius said. How? Remus lifted his head, hot with terror. Might as well start packing now. No, don't. Look, he wants to talk to you about it. He's not going straight to Dumbledore or anything. Doesn't that mean something? But Remus had already got up, opened his trunk, and began emptying things into it. He might have to leave straight away. They might not even give him time to pack. Would they let him keep his wand? He'd grown very fond of it, and it belonged to his father, so it was rightfully his. Perhaps if he promised only ever to do the reading spell with it. Remus! Sirius grabbed his shoulders. He flinched, but only because he expected it to hurt. Sirius's dark blue eyes bored into him, and he tried to look away. Listen to me, Black said very gently. Just wait, okay? Just wait and see what James says. He's your friend. We're marauders, all of us. That's bollocks. Remus shoved him away. That's complete bollocks. You two are the marauders, you and him. Me and Peter are just your pet charity cases. He seized his pyjamas from the end of the bed and flung them into the trunk. I'm not that much of an idiot, Black. I'm probably better off going back to where I belong. It was the first time Sirius had ever been speechless. But then it was the first time Remus had ever said so much to him. His mouth twitched once or twice, as though he wanted to speak, but couldn't quite manage it. Remus kept packing. Just wait, Sirius said hoarsely, leaving the room. Just wait and see what he says.